China has released a report summarizing its progress in combating climate change. Carbon intensity decreased by 20% between 2010 and last year, well above its 17% goal. That's according to China's Vice Minister of the National Development and Reform Commission. Carbon intensity refers to annual emissions divided by GDP. China says it effectively controlling greenhouse gas emissions and adhering to the framework of the UN Convention on Climate Change. Tyson Slocum is director of the energy program with the nonprofit group Public Citizen. Tyson, welcome.
Great to be here.
Let's talk about some of these numbers that I just read. Carbon intensity decreased by 20% between 2010 and 2015. China says it's well above the 17% goal. How significant is this, and why are these numbers so important?
Yeah, there's no question that China and other countries are making a lot of progress in trying to deal with reducing greenhouse gas emissions to address climate change. And there's no question that China's deployed an enormous amount of renewables. They're investing a lot in energy efficiency. But there are still challenges. China has more than 200 gigawatts of coal-fired power plants under construction. India has another 65 gigawatts. And so the fact that we're seeing still coal-fired power plants being built in China means that there are going to be a lot of challenges, that we are going to see emissions growth, and that China and other countries are going to have to work hard to try and reduce emissions all they can.
Clearly, there are things that China has done well.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the lessons countries like you mentioned India can learn from China? Right.
Well, I think the first thing is that entering into cooperative agreements like the Paris Agreement, there's going to be additional meetings in Marrakesh next week. Global climate change is a global problem. Countries can make all sorts of unilateral moves, but unless they're done in concert with other nations through these types of framework agreements, we're not going to be able to successfully address it. So I think the biggest lesson that India can learn was the cooperation that China's had with other countries, including the United States, on agreeing to reduce emissions going forward.
The Paris Agreement on Climate Change that you mentioned, really the United States and China led the effort.
Right.
Nearly 200 countries were involved in negotiations. It officially, or legally I should say, takes effect on Friday. What does that mean?
This is huge. So China and the United States really led the way, and that's important because collectively, the two countries represent about 38% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So you have to have both of those countries on board. And they're just two of more than 80 other countries that have so far ratified the agreement. And so what the Paris Agreement does is it says we all agree that we are going to set country-specific targets to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to control warming, to limit it to just 2 degrees Celsius of warming going forward.
Legally binding agreement?
Well, the thing is, in order for the United States to get this treaty through, the United States wasn't going to be able to get the United States Senate to ratify it because there's opposition, mainly from Republicans in the U.S. Senate, to any sort of climate change deal. So the Paris Agreement is more voluntary in nature. It does, what's going to be negotiated in Marrakesh beginning next week are the details on how countries are going to be reporting and verifying their emission goals and target reductions.
Which is so important.
Absolutely, but it isn't necessarily, there's no third-party enforcement. It's more what Secretary of State John Kerry called naming and shaming. So you're going to publicly say we're going to reduce our emissions by X amount, and if you fail to do it, you're going to be named and shamed.
Tyson, very quickly, we're 1 week away from the U.S. presidential election. What effect do you think it will have on global efforts to combat climate change?
Well, there are significant differences between the two candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton, her and her team have been leaders on acknowledging the science of climate change, committing the United States to continuing to work cooperatively with the rest of the world to reduce emissions. Donald Trump is doing just the opposite. He has denied that climate change is real, and his advisors question the need for international cooperation on climate change.
So much to talk about. Thank you so much. We'll have to leave it at there. Tyson Slocum.
Thank you.